Hello everybody, and welcome to Yoshi-1 Kenobi's Jumpstart Historic Set review for the green themes and rainbow that appear in Jumpstart. So let's begin. So there are 10 teams. There's cats, dinosaurs, elves, Garrick, lands, +1, predatory, tree-hugging, walls, and I'm also including rainbow as part of this review because green's typically the color that ramps into the multicolored spells, and I needed some place to review Rainbow without making it a video specifically for that. So overall, there are 14 new rares and 7 new mythics, which is a lot more than what we had in White and Blue in previous reviews. As for reprints, we have 6 rares and 1 mythic, so green has a lot of new stuff coming its way. First on our list, we have Cats, with a reprinted rare of Feline Sovereign. The rare card that's new in this set is Lurking Predators and has absolutely nothing to do with cats. It's a 6 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put that card on the bottom of your library. Which means that every time your opponent casts a spell, you get at the very least a scry. And if it's a creature card, you get to put it on the battlefield for free. No strings attached. And this is a fairly good effect when you hit what you want to hit. If you're hitting a mana dork, not so good. If you're hitting a land, well, I guess scrying it to the bottom is not the worst. If you get a creature that fights another creature and you get to destroy your opponent's board in the process, it can be backbreaking. Now this is a 6 mana enchantment that does not much when you cast it. So I don't think it's going to be a competitive card, but it's definitely a fun card to play with. And if you ramp into it, you can put it fairly fast and keep your opponent into a controlled type of scenario, which is something green doesn't typically do. So I like the flavor of this card, probably not very competitive. Next in the themes we have Dinosaurs, which reprinted Galta, Primal Hunger, and Primal Might as the reprinted rares. We do get a new mythic rare, which is Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, a 3 mana legendary elf scout with stats 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. If that was only for you, this card would be awesome. But this also applies to your opponent. And since you're playing a 2/3 on turn 3, it is quite likely that your opponent is going to get the first trigger off of this by playing a stronger creature. The second ability is pay green, tap it, and add X mana in any combination of color where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So as a baseline stat, since this card has 2 power, you pay green, you get 2 mana of any color, so it's a mana dork for 3 mana. If you have a Galta on the battlefield, then this card will generate 11 mana. You heard me right, 11 mana. If you use Stats Booster on it, same thing, you can generate absurd amount of mana. And absurd amount of mana on a mana dork is something that can lead to infinite combos. In particular, we had the Gauntlet combo, where we have Gauntlet of Light, which pay 3 mana to untap a creature. Now, if you put the Gauntlet of Light on Sylvana and boost Sylvana, you have infinite mana of any colors you want. So I think that this card is going to see more play as a combo enabler than just for the flat-out value. And the ability to draw a card is likely to backfire because it's very easy for people to play 3 powered creatures on 3 or 4 in the mana curve. Next, we have Elves, everyone's favorite little green creatures. And we're getting lots of elves. Actually, we're getting 2 new mythic rares in this set. We have the Allosaurus Shepherd, which is a 1 mana 1/1, non-legendary, and it can't be countered. Green spells can't be countered. For 1-drop, that's a fairly good effect, especially if you're playing against a counter-heavy opponent. So it's at the very least a fairly decent sideboard card. For 6 mana, all the elves you control become 5/5s dinosaurs, in addition to their original types. So this is really an elf card that's made for elf tribal. And if you can get enough elves on the battlefield, you can probably generate that 6 mana fairly quickly, and then Alpha Strike your opponent to just one-shot him with a bunch of 5/5 Elves dinosaurs. The second mythic rare we're getting is Crater Hoof Behemoth, an 8 mana behemoth 5/5 with haste. When it enters the battlefield, creature you control gain trample and +X/+X, where X is number of creatures you control. If you have 2 creatures plus the behemoth, this is a slightly inferior version of Enray's Forerunner. If you have 3 other creatures or more, this is a much more powerful version. In general, it is going to be a late game finisher and very explosive at that. You can use it with Transmogrify or in a token deck, or with Luca in a token deck, or both, and then you summon a bunch of tokens, you transmogrify one of those tokens into a Crater Hoof Behemoth, and you swing for lethal out of nowhere, starting from turn 4, coming to a theater near you. Next, we have the Elvish Archdruid, which is a 3 mana dork that adds green mana for every elf you control. It's also the Lord of Elves. It gives all your elves +1/+1. So it does a lot of cool things. 3 mana's a little expensive, but it's just one of the staple of the elf deck. So it will see play in that archetype, and there's no reason to play it outside of elves, obviously. Speaking of elves, we're getting 2 interesting elves as uncommons. We're getting Dwynen's Elite, which is a 2 mana 2/2 that summons a 1/1 green elf warrior token if you control another elf. And we have a 3/3 for 2 that will cost 5 unless you reveal another elf from your hand. So we're getting a bit more support for elves in the Elves theme, which is quite convenient, even though we're also getting a massive behemoth. Elf Tribal just became a lot more interesting. Next on our list, we have Garrick, which, like the other Planeswalkers list, is mostly a reprint of Garrick Unleashed and Garrick's Harbinger. Now, there is an uncommon in this theme that I find quite interesting. It's Hunter's Insight. Choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or Planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. It's essentially an instant speed divination if you're about to connect with a creature. That's a high risk, high reward, where if your opponent blows up your creature, then you lose the effect, you lose your mana for the turn, you don't draw anything, and you go cry in a corner. But if you do get to resolve it, and you say you're hitting for 4 or 5, then you get to pay the cost of a divination to get the effect of a Big Sphinx's Revelation without life gain. See details inside. So you have the ability to draw a lot of cards from Hunter's Insight, is what I'm saying, for fairly cheap cost. But there is risk associated with it, so I think we'll see a couple of these see play. Next, we have lands. And in lands, we get no reprints, and we get a mythic rare, Ulvenwald Hydra. It's a 6 mana star, where the power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. So presumably it starts as a 6/6 for 6, with reach. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. That's okay. I don't think it's going to see much play, simply because that's a very similar effect to Cavalier of Thorns, except that Cavalier of Thorns costs 1 less mana, still has very decent stats, but has an additional effect when it leaves the battlefield. So the fact that Cavalier of Thorns is cheaper and it has an additional effect means that it's unlikely that that Hydra will see play. Next, we have the Oracle of Muldaya. It's an elf shaman for 4 mana. It's a 2/2, and you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play lands from the top of your library. So this is very similar effect to the Courser of Kruphix. We already have one of those in Standard. We have Azusa that allows us to play more lands. This one's at 4 mana, has weak stats. I don't think it's going to see much play, simply because the other ones are cheaper. We have 3 mana alternatives with the same effect. This one doesn't have particularly good stats. If you want duplicates of that effect, people might play a bit of Oracle of Muldaya. The fact that it's an elf is quite relevant, so you can play it in elf tribal. That is where I might see it see play. Next we have Fadiasir, which is a common 1/1 for 2 that I wanted to bring to your attention because its effect is draw a card and reveal it. If it isn't a land, discard it. So this allows you to smooth out your land draw by picking up lands from the top of your library, which is a fun effect for 2. I think we had a green dryad that did that in one of the previous core sets that was borderline playable. But now this one also has the fact that you discard a card if it's not a land card. So it's good in reanimator type strategies because it allows you to discard the top card of your library and pick it up if it's a land. So you get a desirable effect either way, which I think is fairly decent, and it might see play because of that. On the other hand, it's a little slow because it's not entered the battlefield, but hey, it's a 1/1 for 2. What have you got to lose? Next we have Sylvan Ranger, an elf scout for 2 mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. This is a fair card that you should keep in mind for mana fixing and ramping purposes. In particular, we've seen Birth of Meletis, fetch a plains, put a body on the battlefield, and then gain some life in subsequent turns, and that has seen play in Standard, and it has been a fairly good card. This is quite similar, in that it puts a body in play and fetches land on the same turn. The upside is you get to fetch non-plane lands. The downside is that it's a 1/1 and not a 0/4, but I think it has some value in certain decks. The next theme we're going to look at is Predatory. We have Nate of the Dire Hunt, a 4-mana 3/3. Whenever one or more creatures you control fight or becomes blocked, you draw a card. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 3 to double a creature's power until end of turn, and that creature must be blocked this combat, which in turn will net you a draw. So that card is fairly decent. A 3/3 for 4 is weak, especially in green, but the both abilities synergize well together, and they're decent. Forcing the opponent to block kind of acts as a removal spell, depending on the types of creatures you have in play, but typically green has bigger creatures in play. You're also going to draw a card. If you have entered the battlefield fight effects, then you'll get to draw cards off of those. Even a prey upon becomes destroy target creature, draw a card. So there are some very good synergies with this card. I think it's borderline playable because the effects are pretty good, but it's competing with a lot of powerful stuff in Historic for 4 mana. Next we have Momentous Fall, a 4 mana instant where you also need to sacrifice a creature. You draw cards equal to the power of the creature, and you gain life equal to its toughness. This card is fairly bad. Paying 4 mana basically costs you your turn. You're sacrificing a creature on top of it, and you need to sacrifice a big creature to get a big payoff. So 4 mana and sacrificing a big creature for a handful of life and some cards, it's the type of move that you only want to do very, very late game, and you don't want to play 4 mana spells that are only useful very, very late game. So I don't think this will see much play. We have Ravenous Ballet, a 4 mana 4/4 that also will not see much play because you can only sacrifice a beast to gain 4 life, which means that if your opponent tries to remove it, you gain 4 life. It's okay, it's not great. It's probably a card for the box in the basement. Then we have Thragtusk, the real reason to pick Predatory. It's a 5 mana 5/3. Enters the battlefield, here's 5 life. It leaves the battlefield, create a 3/3 green beast, and it's the perfect card to flicker. So you basically exile it, then return it to the battlefield to keep on spamming these effects. It has a decent body for the mana cost, slightly weak, but with the enter the battlefield and the leave battlefield effect, it's sure to provide a lot of value. And I can see Tragdust being played already. It's going to be a nightmare for all of these red players. The next team we have is +1, one of everybody's favorite mechanics to stack +1/+1 counters on creatures. First card we get is a mythic rare, Primeval Bounty, a 6 mana enchantment that's all around trees. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 3/3 green beast. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You play a land? Don't worry, we've got you covered. You gain 3 life. Now, this is a pretty cool card that gives you a lot of iterative advantage over the course of the game, but it's just so expensive and does nothing as it enters the battlefield that I don't think it can compete with the other enchantments or artifacts that we've had. For example, we've had the Fiery Emancipation for 6 mana that says, triple your damage! Now that's a 6 mana enchantment I can get behind. These types of iterative advantage, I'd rather play the Great Henge, which I can cheat out for much cheaper and have very similar value out of it, if not even more value out of the Great Henge. The second rare we're getting is Branching Evolution, a 3 mana enchantment. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. Now we have Conclave Mentor right now in Standard and Historic. That puts an additional +1/+1 counter. So we have already multiple +1/+1 matter types of cards in Historic right now. So this card is fairly powerful. It's really cool. I mean, you can do stupid stuff with this and the Ozolite and with Conclave Mentor, as mentioned before. So it's a very fun card to play. I'm not sure if it's powerful enough because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield on turn 3. So I'm not sure just how playable this card is going to be because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield. But it does very powerful things in decks that are all about the +1/+1 mechanic. So I'm looking forward to seeing it in play as a couple of copies. In particular, they're going to stack. So if you have 2 copies, then you'll get 4 times the counter. 3 copies, you'll get 8 times the counter. 4 copies, well, if you have 3 copies and you haven't won the game yet, you're probably doing something wrong. Next, we have Champion of Lampholt. Creatures with power less than the Champion of Lampholt's power can't block creatures you control. Okay. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on the champion. Alright, so it's a 1/1 that grows when you play creatures. It's not very exciting for 3 mana. I mean, Quirion Dryad's going to do better and it costs 2, and it's not just creatures. So I don't think that this card will see much play. On the other hand, if you have token generators, you might be able to put a bunch of +1/+1 counters at once. Still, I don't think it's that good. There are much better 3-drops in green. Then we have Rikshar, Pima's Renegade. A 3 mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 2 other creatures. On up to 2 target creatures. So it can target itself. Each creature you control with a counter has tap for add green. So you can transform some of your creatures into mana dorks and make them grow. That's a fairly powerful effect for 3. So I definitely think Rikshar is going to see some play. Also, it's a legendary elf. So it's fairly powerful on its own. It's legendary. It goes with the elf synergies. I definitely see Rikshar making an impact on Historic. Then we have 3 Hugging. The first card we have is Primordial Sage, a 6 mana 4/5. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. Now, people aren't playing Beast Whisperer very much, and it has the same effect on 4 mana. I see no reason why this would see this would ever see play. It just costs more. The +2/+2 of stats for the extra 2 mana, definitely not worth it. It's a spirit. If there's ways to cheat out a spirit, maybe. Nah, I don't think so. It's not a very good card. Then we have Soul of the Harvest, a 6 mana 6/6 trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. This is very similar to the Primordial Sage, but on a bigger body and with trample. Still, if you want to draw cards off a body, play Beast Whisperer. Great Henge just does a better impression of both of these effects. It's an elemental. There might be some elemental synergies, but again, I don't think it's quite good enough. And then we have Verdant Embrace, a 5 mana enchantment which gives +3/+3 to a target creature, and at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green sapling creature. Now, creating a 1/1 at every upkeep means you're creating 2 per turn, one during yours, one during your opponent's, and that can degenerate quite quickly. The fact that we can now put this ability on a creature with hexproof makes it playable, I think. I mean, you stick a Verdant Embrace on the Paradise Druid, and you suddenly have a 5/4 hexproof creature, as long as it doesn't tap, that will summon you a horde of small saplings for block. I don't think it's the card that most decks want to play. You might want to play it in kind of a Boggles control strategy, if that ever comes to exist. Otherwise, well, you don't want to be hugging trees right now. Also, they're reprinting Jolral, Wantley Recluse, which is probably the best card, even if it's a reprint in this set. Then we have Walls, and Walls has the Towering Titan, a 6 mana 0/0. Okay, when it enters the battlefield, it enters with X+1/+1 counters, where X is the total toughness of other creatures you control. You also get to sacrifice a creature with Defender to give trample to all creatures in play. So at face value, it really is a 0/0 for 6 mana on an empty board, which is absolutely horrible. Well, obviously, because it's a 0/0. But now, since this is meant to be played with walls, if you have 3 walls with 4 toughness in play, this enters as a 12/12, where you can give it trample very easily by sacrificing one of those creatures. So it's a finisher on a full board. Giving trample to your defenders is a decent ability, but the fact that you need a board already, doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, makes it a fairly weak card. Then we have Assault Formation, a 2 mana enchantment. Creatures you control assign combat damage equal to their toughness rather than power. You can give creatures with Defender the ability to attack by paying green for each creature, and you can also boost your team by giving them +0/+1 by paying 3 mana. So Assault Formation is decent because it's a redundant effect to all of these cards that allow your defenders to attack. The upside is that it only costs 2 mana. The downside is that you need to pay extra mana to allow your creatures to attack. So it might be useful to have a couple of copies in your defender deck, and this will probably not see much play outside of defender type strategies. Now, this is probably even better with creatures that don't have Defender, but have a lot of toughness. Like a Yoked Ox, for example, is the 0/4 for 1 mana in white. That thing does not have the Defender, so it's really just a 4/4, which can start attacking from turn 2 with Assault Formation. So it's going to see play in a fun deck. Don't think the archetype is that competitive, but it's definitely fun. In order to make the archetype a little bit more competitive, we've seen the Overgrown Battlement and Wall of Blossoms getting added to the format. Now the Battlement allows, they're both 0/4s for 2, which is okay defensive stats, and they both have a very good effect. The Overgrown Battlement allows you to tap and gain green mana for each creature with Defender you control. And since you're playing this in a Defender deck, it allows you to ramp up fairly fast. The second one, Wall of Blossom, enters the battlefield to draw a card. Now this one is very powerful. Basically, you get a 0/4 blocker for free. Well, for 2 mana. It's very similar to Birth of Meletus in that you get a card from your deck into your hand, and you get a 0/4 blocker. You get the blocker quicker with Wall of Blossom, and you get a card from your deck instead of a plains. But I think it's definitely comparable to that, and it's a card that's going to see inclusion in decks that just want to survive into the mid game, and it's a good card at surviving. The next team that I want to review is Rainbow. It doesn't really fit the green team, but hey, it contains some green cards, and I needed a place to put Rainbow. So Rainbow comes with a reprint of Chamber Sentry, which we don't care about too much. It also comes with Maelstrom Archangel, a 5 mana 5/5 flying, which is fairly good stats, although the 5 colors of mana makes it restrictive. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. Do I smell shenanigans. How sweet is it to hit your opponent with your Maelstrom Archangel, to then play an Omniscience from your hand for free, to then play whatever you want for free, because that's what Archangel is all about. Heavy discounts. Now, this is a card for fun decks. That's about it. Connecting with a 5/5 flying for 5 with no defensive ability is still going to be fairly difficult. First, you need to survive. 2, you need the Archangel to survive. And 3, you need to be able to connect a hit with it, which is asking quite a lot. But it can happen, and if it does, make sure you have something good to play for free and make your opponent pay heavily for it. A card that's quite interesting is Mirrodin's Core, which is an untapped land, so you can tap it for colorless mana right off the bat, but you can also tap it to put a charge counter on it. And when it has a charge counter on it, you can remove the charge counter to pay for mana of any color. I see Mirrodin's Core has a lot of potential for mana fixing in decks that want to splash a specific color, but in most cases does not need it. So it's another land to add to your arsenal, and I think it's going to see some play. Keep it in mind when deck building. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe by clicking the Yoshi icon at the right of your screen. It doesn't cost you any mana, and it greatly helps to support this channel and keep the awesome videos coming.